Hi everyone, I'm Marilyn, CEO and founder of Cosmic Centaurs and the host of Centaur Stage, a weekly video series on LinkedIn Live where we explore bold ideas about the future of work and learning every Thursday at 2:30 p.m. UAE time. I'm joined by some incredible guests who will share their insights and opinions about how we work and learn. We're really excited to be back after the holidays. We hope you all had a good rest and a wonderful holiday season. And before we begin, of course, as always, do give that video a like, add a comment in the box below. This is a pre-recorded episode, but I'll also be there live with you, so I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. Today's episode features a very special guest, Rama Chakaki. Hi, Rama. It's so nice to have you.
Thank you for hosting me.
Yes, thank you for joining us from halfway around the world. As you can see, it's night for me and it's morning for Rama. So So let me just introduce you a little bit for everybody. Rama has 25 years of technical and communications experience in social development for Arab youth, her passion. She's currently Chief Operating Officer of Explain, a stealth startup in the AI space based in Silicon Valley. Rama is also the founder of VIP.Fund, a venture philanthropy fund investing in youth programs and technology startups, and founder of EdSeed, her philanthropic crowdfunding platform for refugee students seeking funding and mentorship for higher education. And in case she wasn't busy enough, Rama is also a partner at two social impact startups, Mint and Laurel, a personal care and homeware brand empowering artists from the MENA region, and Aya Animations, a values-based edutainment production house. More recently, she also became an equity partner at Transform VC, a startup studio, VC investment and advisory firm. She's a TEDx speaker, an MIT solver, an avid reader, and has been appointed the title of Master Chef by her two children, whom she says are her proudest achievement. Rama, it's so nice to have you on Centaur Stage.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much.
So let me introduce the topic for today. We've talked a lot about how COVID accelerated the rate at which transformation is occurring in organizations and accelerating our move, obviously, towards flexible work models. One thing we see a lot when that happens is that this allows hiring managers to broaden their prospective talent pool. According to research by BCG, increasing diversity in organizations has direct effects on the bottom line. They looked at 1,700 companies across 8 countries and found that those that had more diverse management teams had 19% higher revenue due to innovation. We also see higher employee engagement, better performance, and a more inclusive culture. Recruiters filling remote positions can now seek out talent beyond geographical boundaries of the city or country where their offices are located. And given that geography is often linked to socioeconomic status, ethnicity, educational background, that means that recruiters can potentially tap into marginalized talent pools where enthusiasm and drive is rife. But the data shows that marginalized communities don't get access to knowledge economy jobs. Refugees and displaced people are amongst the most marginalized in their communities. And as of 2019, we think there's about 80 million forcibly displaced people around the world. These people have faced continuous challenge in securing their basic needs, let alone in finding work in their host countries where there are structural and legal limitations to prevent them from becoming active members of the economy. Rama and I will be debating whether remote work provides more or less opportunities for these talent. Our debate is structured around 5 motions: culture, process, systems, people, and structure. That's a bit of a self-promotion here. This is actually part of our proprietary framework called the Omnichannel Organization that we use with our clients to help them assess their readiness for flexible work. So we're going to use that for our discussion today. So Rama, what we're going to do is I'm going to read a motion related to each one of these 5 topics. And if you agree with it, give me a thumbs up. So, and if you disagree, give me a thumbs down, and then I'll let you start. So if you say that you agree, I'll let you defend your point, and I'll always try to, have the counter argument, which isn't going to be easy given how much you know about this topic, but I'm going to give it a try and try to keep it entertaining for everybody.
Good.
All right, so let's dive in. Motion 1, people. Remote work settings make it difficult for refugee talent to be visible. Given that they're part of these marginalized and underrepresented groups, it becomes even harder for them to be seen in the work setting that is distributed. Do you agree with that? That it's harder for refugees to be seen? You disagree? Brilliant.
I do.
The very work.
It actually makes it easier. I mean, first, let's put the population in context. 80 million is larger than the population of the UK or France. It's about the same size as the population of Turkey or Iran. So we're talking about a country-size population, and they are dispersed. And if you include youth displaced by conflict or impacted by conflict, then that's a much bigger scope, like youth in Lebanon or other areas. They are actually helped by remote work because the online space is far more democratic and open than the actual places they may reside in. And I mean democratic not in the sense of politics, but in the sense of access to the job market. Because of the challenges that host countries may have, oftentimes the refugees are not able to tap into the local job market, and therefore a virtual one is much more easily accessible to them, provided they know how to get to it and provided they have the skills for it. And that's just another dimension that we would have to tackle. A lot of organizations are working with refugee populations and youth impacted by conflict to bring them closer and to this virtual setting and enable them to gain access to remote work.
Yeah, I understand that the legal implications could sometimes simply make the in-person job economy inaccessible. But in the scenario where it is accessible to them, I'm going to quote my husband actually on this one. He always used to say that actually the office is also a great equalizer, provided you can get dressed in a way that kind of doesn't point out your socioeconomical background. When you're at the office, you can be the same as everybody else, right? And you can perform in the same way. And with remote work, a lot of, provided they do gain access to work, a lot of the restrictions then become about, do I have a space to work from where I'm not disturbed? Do I have to contribute to household chores all the time? Am I constantly interrupted? But also when I appear on a Zoom call, what do I look like? And do I know how to behave in these settings? And so in that sense, I think that can be a negative for people that come from these backgrounds because they don't have access to great internet, computers, so it kind of adds to the amount of things that they need to provide or to have provided to them in order to simply just be able to perform the job. And so I wonder if that's something that you've observed, but my point of view is, yeah, I fully agree. I've actually, even in Lebanon, it was difficult to hire, for example, Palestinians who had been in Lebanon, like they were born there. In fact, it was home for them, but it was always very complex to hire them. I just wonder if beyond that sort of hiring hurdle, remote work doesn't then become a little more difficult for people from that background. But I wonder what your view is on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a valid point that workspaces are equalizers, especially if companies have proper orientation programs that put everyone on the same footing. But that's one thing at the VIP Fund for the past 5 years we've been doing is we looked at what is it that refugee youth or youth impacted by conflict, what are they missing to be able to get online? And so we started addressing emotional intelligence, skills, presentation skills, search skills, being able to have this broad knowledge base that their counterparts may have elsewhere. A lot of them were unaware of the tools available to them to gain access to the marketplaces, companies like Nebbish, Willa, Upwork, or others that are available for remote work for other youth. So once you give them that orientation, and open up their eyes to what's available, plus train them on the remote work tools like Slack and others, then they are on equal footing as someone who's in the same office space. And luckily, we live in an age where these online tools make it so easy that even your virtual background can hide wherever you may be if you feel that it's not the right setting or if you have 8 people in the room with you. So I think it's become much easier for them in that sense. There are other hurdles, but from the sense of I'm like anybody else in the room, you really can't tell the difference, provided they get the right training and orientation.
All right. Onwards to motion 2, culture. So here's the motion. Remote work settings are not ideal for helping refugee talent acclimate to company culture. Without explicit, intentional inclusion initiatives, distance reinforces people's tendency to favor those who are similar to them and further ostracizes refugee talent that may already feel this way given their forced displacement from their home countries. Do you agree with that?
So, yes, I agree. However, I think that this is an age-old problem, because that same problem existed for women before they entered the workplace and before they were embraced in workplaces and the workplaces became friendly to women. And we're still trying to figure this out. So for refugees, it's the exact same thing. It's cultures. People and cultures usually gravitate towards what's known and familiar, and you have to make it known that you are inclusive, and then highlight who you want to include and how you need to work on including them. And I mean, the space that I'm working in now, we're tackling the same issue. AI tends to be very exclusive, and we're working on democratizing it in our company. And so with the refugee population and youth impacted by conflict, yes, of course, there are a lot of biases because people don't know them, and what they don't know is like, okay, can they work? Do they know how to work? Do they have the skill set? So our job, again, at the VIP Fund, a lot of other organizations are doing this, is showcase them for who they are, with their talents, with their experiences, the richness of their emotional journeys, the resilience that they bring that a lot of others like us may not have. And then all of a sudden you find that they're elevated beyond the status of an employee who may have the same skill set and is right there in the same country because of all these other skills that their experience has brought, for them. Of course, there are still some challenges. Sometimes there are language barriers. Sometimes there's that nuanced cultural misunderstanding. But I emphasize an organization that wants to do it can create the orientation programs or partner with nonprofits that have these programs to bring up their skill sets.
Yeah, I'm not sure which one I'm going to disagree on, but maybe I'll add some nuance to that because your argument was incredibly nuanced. And so maybe I'll just say that something that's, while I agree with you, it is an age-old problem, and it's a problem even for people who don't come from complex backgrounds. Anybody's getting onboarded these days in organizations is finding it hard. But at the same time, what could be interesting and what could be a way to kind of use this to develop your connection to the organization is that a lot of the barriers of how you would normally have networked with people, which is in the office, but also outside of it, going to lunch, going out, whatever, socializing, are no longer a problem, right? So the fact that you couldn't, for example, have afforded to maybe go to the same place as your colleagues, or would choose not to, or maybe your mom makes you lunch every day and you don't want to make her sad by not having it, it is kind of eliminated. And maybe your ability to network, again, provided, of course, that you're empowered to do that and that you're savvy, which is not the case for anybody. It's a difficult thing, but provided that you're given the chance to do that and that you push yourself in that sense, then you're able to connect with anybody. And it kind of removes that barrier of like where you sit or who you are allowed to speak to. And perhaps that's a good way for people to connect with the cultures of their organizations and be able to build maybe a broader network than what they could have built if they had been at the office. So while they miss all of those implicit clues about the culture, perhaps building a broader network can be a way to to compensate for that.
Yeah, and this type of online work does afford them this broader culture and the connections that are more global. I think the biggest challenge is the leveling of the emotional intelligence and the readiness of the soft skills and removing the barriers of I feel that I'm different, or I feel that I'm less than, and it's not very challenging. I mean, half of the population doesn't even feel it. Like half of the youth that we work with feel very entitled in the right sense. Like, I've earned it, I've done my work, I'm the same as everybody else, and I can. Whereas some others may feel a little intimidated at the beginning, but then you can help them adjust with the right training.
Motion 3, systems. So this motion says, the reliance on technology and internet connectivity make remote work unattainable for displaced talent. Refugees living in camps or in host countries where such resources are inaccessible cannot actively contribute or create value for organizations.
So I would say yes. And all right, so technology barrier is actually hugely disappointing. When I was much younger and working in this field, it was so exciting to think that this internet was something anybody and everybody can access. And to see how exclusive it's become is really disheartening. And I know that there are a lot of organizations working on making it open and available, but there are also a lot of organizations that are deliberately confounding the process and making it harder for refugees and others to access. In one of the countries where we operate with refugees inside of a camp, it took us 6 months to get permits to give higher bandwidth internet for students that are required to go to university and required to study online during COVID. So imagine you're a nursing student and you only have very limited bandwidth. You can't even see, the labs or things that are happening. Not to mention, can't download books, can't listen to audiobooks. And it took us an equal amount of time to find an organization that will bring in laptops that we had procured for the students. So those barriers have to be removed because it makes no sense. I feel like education is a basic human right. And alongside that, the access to technology has to be when you are forced to be in a camp environment. And this obviously extends to power grids. Like a lot of our students have power outages that they have 8 hours of classes a day, but only 5 hours of electricity. So there's no way for them to actually study at the same pace or rate as others. So if you remove those barriers, the abundance of online resources are, just amazing. And the language services, but you have to be able to solve for that first mile challenge, which is access to basic internet and access to basic electricity and access to basic just laptops and whatnot.
Yeah, I feel to that point, but I think something that perhaps will come as a solution, I'm hopeful, is that now that everybody's working from home, companies are kind of revisiting their benefits and what they provide their employees, right? Like it used to be like, we will provide you with a desk space and a computer, but now they're kind of having to rethink providing pods, maybe not that much, but at least a laptop. I mean, we've had clients where an employee didn't have a camera on her computer at home. And so they bought that for her. And she's not like a refugee. She could have bought it for herself, but it's just like companies are now getting to the point where they're rethinking like, okay, what are the benefits that we need to provide so that our employees have good working conditions? And that's not something they would have bothered with before. And perhaps that's something that can now extend to people who couldn't afford it. But it's just now part of the package, right? That we make sure you have good bandwidth, a camera, good sound system, a computer that works, some of the basics. Hopefully electricity. I see actually, I've recently spoke to somebody in Australia where they're working on helping companies provide batteries to their workers from home so that they can store energy and use it for longer. even not necessarily because the power isn't available, but simply, as a backup for business continuity. So maybe some of these initiatives can really support in that sense to provide that access.
Yeah, and I think once the big players in the tech sector, like the Googles and Facebooks and Microsofts of the world, start looking at the refugee population as a unit, like this is like a country anywhere, and we have to provide for them just as we would provide for other countries, then we could see some disruption in this space. But until those big players do it, it's the smaller companies are struggling with this idea of, okay, is it worth that extra effort for me to go way out of my way to provide these services for one employee or two or even 10? So I think those are the issues that need addressing.
Yeah. Well, the good news, they can refer to a study that I don't remember the numbers now, but Sun Microsystems did this study where they were trying to figure out whether on the whole everybody saves money if people work from home, including providing whatever is needed for them to be able to. And the answer is an overwhelming yes, not to mention the positive impact on the environment and so on. So even small companies, I mean, I don't have an office for Cosmic Centaurs, and it's incredible because the amount of money that I'm saving and the amount of runway that's creating for the company is great. If all I have to do in return is buy a laptop and make sure that it works, then I'm happy to do it. And I'm a small company, right? So yeah, I think it really, really works.
Absolutely.
Right. Onwards to motion 4 around process. So the motion says, refugee talent will need to quickly adapt to new remote work models and processes for which they may not have the basic skills. Companies will have to review their processes and offer training and upskilling where needed. Do you agree with that? Hard one to disagree with, but I'll let you take the floor.
So while again, most of the work conducted will be very similar, whether you're working with a remote employee in downtown Dubai or a remote employee in Zaatari camp. Some of the processes that need changing are in the, again, first mile, the beginning. How do you start and induct and train and bring on board? Because that's where the biggest challenges are. And then once those challenges are overcome, then things become quite systematic. For us, we've seen it in adjusting to how do I pay this employee and figuring out that process, which could be quite convoluted. Another would be, the things we talked about earlier is making sure they have connectivity and other areas. A third is some of the nuanced differences of does this person have the experience to the depth of experience to work in this field that requires access to certain technologies or information that he or she may not have had. So you do sense some gaps. And then the last and most important is oftentimes refugees have gone through traumatic events, and they do suffer from PTSD. So making sure that there's a heightened awareness for that, and that even if on the surface the employee seems like they're on par with everyone else, you don't know when there's a trigger event that causes the emotional disruption to come back up again. So companies need to be mindful of that, need to have the HR procedures to deal with that. And it doesn't happen often, but when it does, it needs to be. And last but not least is sometimes certain refugee populations are on the move and it's not within their control. So as an employer, you have to be thinking about that, is what if there's a critical disruption and this person has to move? So what backups do I have in place to make sure that it doesn't disrupt the rest of the workflow?
Yeah. Oh, those are really incredible points. Actually, some of them I'd never considered. It's hard to disagree with what you just said. Perhaps I'll just point out maybe to those who are listening who might be hiring is that these populations are also, by virtue of their experiences, incredibly crafty and are good at finding solutions themselves. In that sense, yesterday I was talking to a friend, and he said, I started guitar lessons. I'm like, oh great, who's your professor? Where are they? And he's like, my professor's in Syria. I'm like, oh, that's incredible. And how does he teach you? And he said, on Zoom. And I'm like, okay, how much does he charge you? He said $10. I'm like, how do you pay him? And it's just like, because we've had to be very crafty at figuring out how to continue to generate income and find livelihood. I don't know that this applies, that the numbers will say, yes, all of them are able to do this, but at least some members of those populations have kind of figured out how to do it, or if they haven't, they're sort of nimble and smart enough. They've had to figure out a lot more complex things that if we give them a chance and kind of give them that support, they'll find a way to be sort of active contributors. So maybe it's not something that the data would overwhelmingly support, but at least the hiring managers should consider that and give people a chance, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to speak a little bit broadly now, but I mean, I feel like oftentimes the approach to the humanitarian relief is really counterproductive because it leads to subsidized degradation. The longer you have people sitting and just receiving aid and not giving them the opportunity to work like anybody else, the worse their situation becomes for them and for host countries. Whereas if you open up these opportunities for them to leverage their skills, and they are incredibly resourceful and capable, then you bring them into your economy and you really raise the economy instead of having this degradation happen year upon year. And then you end up with some refugee camps that have 70% unemployment rates, which is a disaster for the economy that's hosting them. And the opposite is very true, that they can flourish with offering them employment opportunities.
That's actually a perfect transition to our fifth and last motion around structure. So here goes. Remote work does not necessarily create more opportunity for refugees, given the structural limitations preventing companies from employing them in the first place. Host countries may deny organizations from offering work permits to talent, block access to payment channels or health insurance coverage. I know we did touch upon that a little bit. Perhaps, I'm pretty sure you'd agree, but tell us a little bit about how you can counter these things. Tell us about crafty ways of paying people who may be unbanked in the country where they're located. How can we get over that hurdle?
So thank you for bringing that point up. And it really seriously has been the biggest continuous and consistent challenge. And there was great promise at the beginning with cryptocurrencies that they would be a great alternative to banking and allow people access to payment when they don't have it. But unfortunately, they haven't come through yet, at least not in the mass scale that is required. So companies are having to figure out channels and back channels and paying through NGOs, and sometimes having to incur as much as 40% overhead just to pay someone because the NGOs that are intermediaries are forcing that. And this is a huge debate I heard recently on people I mostly admire podcast in the US by the founder of Freakonomics. It's a serious debate because it's preventing some 80 million people from gaining access to jobs and getting access to payments through them. But I mean, the creative ways, thankfully, you still have the money transfer channels, and with the right paperwork there and creativity, you're able to pay through them. Oftentimes there are payments in kind. So, you know, if you are providing a technology service like you're doing coding, I may pay for your education. So I'm not giving you money, but I'm paying you for a degree that will advance you. And so these services in kind are great. And then just, you know, sometimes all the young people are looking for is the experience. So onboarding them and saying, okay, I'll give you whatever recommendations you want. And going out of our way, in our case, we've given recommendations for not only future employers, but also in immigration processes, because that's something they need, that recommendation from the outside. So those are the areas that I've tackled. But one thing I'd love to say here is, the more of us that are doing it, for every 1 or 2 or 3 people, then the momentum will build. So even if we're not doing this kind of, oh, I'm hiring 100 people, if you hire 5 and do the work that is required, the extra work, then the momentum will build up, and the bigger organizations will take notice, and the governments as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm not going to debate because I definitely think there's a lot of work left to be done here.
Yeah.
And finally, our last question, which is not a motion, just a question that we ask everybody who comes on the show. So Rama, can I please ask you to complete the sentence and explain to us why you're going to choose the word that you choose? So the future of work is ...
Virtual. And the reason I'm saying that is with everything that's happening with the technology. I think we began seeing it, but it's just going to be mass adoption of virtual work, where with very few exceptions, we're just all working online. We're using smart devices to access our work, whether it's glasses or tablets or others, and just get used to it and get comfortable with it, because we're here to stay online.
Yeah, I can't wait to be augmented by my technology, to be honest. That's a debate.
We're going to have to talk after this, because there are a lot of fun things you can already do.
I can't wait. Yeah, my husband and I always have this debate about, like, would you augment yourself or your kids if you had the choice? And I'm always saying, like, I am not going to fall behind. If I can do it, I will. And I truly believe in the sort of the human technology partnership, as opposed to always seeing these things as one versus the other. It doesn't all have to end in doom scenarios. Rama, once again, thank you so much for being such a wonderful guest. I was really sweating at the idea of debating with you on these topics. I hope I didn't, say too many stupid things. A huge thank you to everyone who's watching the show for tuning in and engaging, potentially, when this airs. We'll be reposting the video, obviously, on our social pages, YouTube and website. Do follow us on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook or wherever you like to receive your updates. You can also visit our website, cosmiccentaurs.com, and subscribe to our newsletter. I look forward to seeing everybody next Thursday for another great episode of Centaur Stage, where we'll be speaking to Nitesh Petra, the founder of the Mindful Initiative, about mindful leadership. See you all next week. Thank you, Rama.
Thank you.